Hello guys, welcome to Phoenix What If. So in this video, we will see, what if Naruto awakened assassin god power and fell in love with Soi Fon? If you enjoy these kinds of stories, don't forget to show us some love by hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. Your support means the world to us. Now, let's start the story. Chapter 1. The Sound O. F. Silence. The air in the forest of death was a predator. It was a thick, humid thing that clung to the skin like a shroud, muffling sound and stealing breath. It smelled of wet earth, blooming rot, and the ancient, mossy patience of things that grew in perpetual twilight. Even Naruto, whose senses were usually dulled by a self-imposed barrage of noise and motion, felt it. The normal chatter of the forest, the scuttling of insects, the call of unseen birds, the rustle of wind-stirred leaves, was gone. There was only a profound and unsettling quiet. Sakura was trembling, her hand hovering near the kunai pouch on her thigh. Her eyes wide and darting between the impenetrable shadows of the canopy. Sasuke stood a few feet ahead, a coiled spring of tension, his hand already resting on the hilt of sheathed blade he wasn't supposed to have. His gaze was fixed on a point deep within the gloom, his Sharingan not yet active, but his instinct screaming a warning that Naruto could feel like a static charge in the air. "What is it?" Naruto whispered, the sound unnaturally loud in the oppressive stillness. "What do you see?" "Nothing," Sasuke hissed back, his voice tight. "That's the problem. There's nothing. No birds. No bugs. Nothing is moving." And then the predator revealed itself. It wasn't a sound or a movement, but a scent. Sickly sweet, like spoiled fruit and grave dirt, it slithered through the trees, carrying with it a pressure that felt oily and unclean. It was a chakra signature so vast, so ancient and corrupt, that it made the stifling humidity feel like a cool spring breeze. It was the absolute antithesis of the vibrant, living energy of the forest. It was the presence of a walking tomb. A figure detached itself from the shadow of a colossal, gnarled tree. It was impossibly tall and slender, its skin a pallid white that seemed to drink the dim light. A cruel, knowing smile played on its lips, and its eyes, golden and slitted like a snake's, held an eternity of cold, predatory amusement. Long, black hair framed a face that was both beautiful and utterly reptilian. Well, the voice was a dry, sibilant rasp, like scales sliding over stone. "Three little leaves, trembling on the vine. I was hoping to find something interesting." Sasuke didn't hesitate. He drew his blade, the whisper of steel a defiant shriek in the silence. "Who are you?" The figure's smile widened. "A seeker of knowledge, a pursuer of potential." Its golden eyes slid past Naruto and Sakura, locking onto Sasuke with a hungry, proprietary intensity. "And I believe I have found it. In you, little Uchiha." Before the last word had fully left its lips, its neck elongated with an unnatural elasticity. The head shot forward, a pale missile closing the distance in less than a heartbeat. The mouth opened impossibly wide, and a long, impossibly sharp tongue, tipped like a spear, shot out. Sasuke, prodigy that he was, moved to block, but a shadow erupted from the ground behind him, a serpent of pure darkness that coiled around his limbs, binding him instantly. He was frozen, a statue of defiance, his eyes wide with shock and fury. The tongue struck, not his throat, but the side of his neck, and a pattern of 3 tomo. A twisted mockery of his own clan's symbol, burned itself into his skin. Sasuke screamed. It was a raw, agonized sound that was cut short as his body went rigid and he collapsed, unconscious. "Sasuke-kun." Sakura's shriek was pure, undiluted terror. She was frozen in place, a rabbit before the viper. The figure, Orochimaru, let his neck retract with a soft, cartilaginous pop. He licked his lips, tasting the air. Such a delightful vessel. He will serve nicely. His gaze then drifted, almost dismissively, to Naruto. Now, for the rubbish. Fear was a cold knot in Naruto's stomach. Sasuke, the invincible Sasuke, had been taken down in a single move. Sakura was useless. He was alone. The red, feral chakra of the 9 tails began to bubble up, a familiar burn of rage and desperation. He bared his teeth, his nails elongating into claws, his whiskers darkening. "You bastard," he roared, the sound ripping through the silence. "I'll kill you." Orochimaru merely chuckled, a dry, rattling sound. "Ah, The Jinchuriki. Such passion. Such wasted energy. He made a single hand seal. A massive serpent, summoned from the ether, erupted from the earth beneath him. It was a behemoth of mottled brown and green scales, its eyes the same malevolent gold as its master's. It towered over the canopy, its shadow plunging the clearing into near total darkness. Its head descended, jaws agape. Fangs the size of daggers dripping with a venom that sizzled where it touched the forest floor. This was it. This was death. Not the abstract idea of it, but the physical, tangible reality of being devoured. Of being erased. The Kyuubi's power surged, a desperate, instinctual tidal wave of survival. But Orochimaru's power was a cold, deep ocean, and the fox's rage was just a ripple on its surface. As the fangs lunged for his face, something inside Naruto broke. It wasn't a snap of rage or a surge of power. It was a fracture, a clean, silent break in the fabric of his perception. The world went silent, not the forest's silence, but a true, absolute void of sound. The roar of the serpent, Sakura's whimpering, the frantic beating of his own heart, all gone. Simultaneously, the world bleached of color. The vibrant greens and murky browns of the forest, the sickly pallor of Orochimaru's skin, the brilliant red of the fox's chakra, it all faded to a stark, elegant monochrome. Black, white, and 1,000 shades of gray. And in this silent, colorless world, he saw them. Threads. Everything was connected by threads of faint, shimmering light. Sakura was a tangled knot of pearlescent white threads of fear and devotion. The unconscious Sasuke was a snarl of dark, angry crimson and brilliant gold, a black curse thread now woven deep within him. The trees, the ground, the very air, all were part of a magnificent, impossibly complex tapestry. The giant snake lunging at him was a construct of shimmering, sickly purple threads, a hollow and malicious thing. A single, dominant thread of the same venomous color led from the snake directly back to Orochimaru. But what held Naruto's attention was the thread representing his own life. It was a brilliant, chaotic, sun-gold cord, flickering with untamed energy, and the snake's purpose was a single, needle-thin purple thread extending from its fangs, aiming to pierce his golden one. He wasn't thinking. Thought was too slow, too clumsy for this new reality. There was only instinct, a deep, resonant understanding that bloomed from the core of his soul. He knew, with a certainty that transcended knowledge, what he had to do. He lifted his hand. It felt disconnected from his body, a thing of shadow and smoke in this grayscale world. He didn't reach for a kunai or try to form a seal. He simply reached for the malevolent purple thread that defined the snake's attack. His fingers, now translucent and dark, passed through the physical form of the fangs as if they were mist. He touched the thread. He plucked it. There was no sound, but he felt it. A single, low, resonant twang, like a cosmic cello string being severed, echoed through his very being. The effect was instantaneous and absolute. The giant serpent didn't just stop. It unraveled. The head, inches from his face, dissolved into a cloud of black dust. The massive body followed, crumbling into nothingness before it even hit the ground, the purple threads that gave it form snapping and fading into oblivion. Orochimaru cried out. It was not a sound of anger or frustration, but of sharp, unadulterated pain. He clutched his chest, his golden eyes wide with a confusion that bordered on terror. He hadn't been hit. Nothing had touched him, but he felt as if a vital, fundamental part of him had been surgically excised. A technique he had read his very essence into wasn't just countered, it had been unmade, and the backlash was a wound to his soul itself. He stared at the small, blond boy who now stood in a posture of impossible calm. The feral rage was gone. The bright blue eyes were now dark, deep, and unnervingly placid. They were the eyes of something that looked at the world and saw not what was there, but the principles that held it together. For the first time in a very, very long time, Orochimaru felt a sliver of genuine fear. This was not the Kyuubi. This was not a power he recognized or understood. It was a violation of the natural order of jutsu, of chakra, of life and death. What are you? He breathed, his voice losing its serpentine confidence. Naruto didn't answer. He was still lost in the silent world of threads. He looked at Orochimaru and saw the nexus of his being. A filthy, tangled knot of countless stolen life threads, a soul so corrupted it was more a parasite than a person. And he saw the ease with which it could all be undone. But the act of severing the snake's thread had a cost. The divine power that had awakened within him, a cold, precise, silent force, collided violently with the raging, chaotic inferno of the Kyuubi's chakra sealed in his gut. The 8 trigrams seal, a masterpiece of fuinjutsu designed to contain one godlike entity, suddenly found itself trying to mediate a war between two. It was like mixing fire and shadow. An unholy, unstable energy began to radiate from Naruto's navel. A keening, high-pitched whine filled the air, the first sound to pierce Naruto's silent world. The grayscale image began to flicker and distort. The air around him cracked. It was not a metaphor. Hairline fractures, like a shattered mirror, spread out from his body, zigzagging through the very fabric of space. Through the cracks, he saw not the forest, but glimpses of elsewhere. A world of sterile white corridors. A desert of endless night. A sky of blood. Orochimaru saw it too. His eyes, wide with a scientist's horror and greed, recognized a phenomenon beyond any space-time ninjutsu he had ever conceived. This was not a technique. This was reality itself coming apart at the seams. With a snarl of frustration and self-preservation, he flickered and vanished into the trees, abandoning his prize for the sake of his life. The cracking intensified. Sakura, finally jolted from her terror, could only stare as the boy she knew as an idiot prankster became the epicenter of a world-breaking cataclysm. Naruto, she screamed. Her voice was a distant echo. He was falling. He ground beneath him had ceased to exist. He plunged into the void between the cracks, a realm of non-existence. For a fleeting, disorienting second, his new sight gave him one last, impossible vision. He saw a loom. It was a structure of incomprehensible scale, stretching into a non-Euclidean infinity. Its frame was made of crystallized starlight and solidified time, and the threads that ran out it were the very fates of countless worlds, shimmering with the lives of every being that had ever existed. And tending this loom was a figure. It was a silhouette of deeper darkness against the void, its form shifting and indistinct. But its movements were precise, ancient, and utterly without emotion. It was a weaver, a gardener of causality, its many spindly arms moving with impossible speed, mending a frayed thread here, tightening a loose one there, and occasionally, with cold, dispassionate purpose, snipping a thread that had grown too bright, too chaotic, too divine. The figure paused in its work. Its non-face seemed to turn, to look directly at him as he tumbled through the non-space. He felt a flicker of something directed at him, not malice, not anger, but cold, clinical annoyance. Like a groundskeeper spotting a weed. Then the vision was gone. Reality reasserted itself with the grace of a sledgehammer. He was falling, not through a conceptual void, but through real, physical air. He smelled dust, sweat, charcoal, and 1,000 other scents, alien and overwhelming. The sound of a bustling, chattering crowd crashed down on him. He hit the ground hard. It wasn't soft earth but packed dirt and stone. The impact drove the air from his lungs in a ragged gasp. For a moment, he just lay there, his mind a whirlwind of monochrome threads, golden eyes, and a cosmic loom. The power that had flooded him receded, leaving behind an echo, a hum in the back of his mind. The world bled back into color, sound rushed back in, but it was all subtly different. Sharper, clearer. He pushed himself up, groaning. He was in a wide, dusty street, flanked by rows of dilapidated wooden buildings. People were everywhere, hundreds of them, all dressed in simple, drab kimonos. They were staring at him. Their faces a mixture of shock and fear. They were transparent. He could see through them, just slightly, each with a small, sputtering flame of spiritual energy in their chests. Souls. He had no time to process this before a new sensation washed over the area. A pressure. Two pressures, in fact, erupting from him like a dual-fronted storm. One was the familiar, searing heat of the Kyuubi's chakra, wild and untamed. The other was new. It was a cold, deep, profound silence, an abyss of power that seemed to absorb light and sound. The two energies swirled around him, a clash-ing maelstrom of red rage and black stillness. The effect on the surrounding souls was immediate and devastating. The pressure crashed down on them like a physical weight. The weaker souls simply flickered and vanished. Others cried out, clutching their chests as the very air became thick as water, crushing them under the sheer density of his existence. Gravity seemed to twist and multiply around him. He was an anomaly, a nuclear reactor detonating in the middle of a town square. He felt them before he saw them. Dozens of them. They moved with a disciplined silence that his new senses picked up. As perfectly controlled threads of motion. They appeared on the rooftops, in the alleyways, melting out of the shadows. They wore black, form-fitting uniforms, their faces obscured by white masks with emotionless red markings. They moved as one, a pack of perfect predators, surrounding him, cutting off all avenues of escape. Each one held a blade. Not a kunai, but a katana, gleaming with a cold, otherworldly light. Naruto got to his feet, his body aching. He wasn't scared. The fear was gone, burned away by the silent clarity of his awakening. He was confused, disoriented, but not afraid. He looked at the masked figures. At the threads of their intent. All sharp, silver lines of duty and deadly purpose, all leading back to a single point. The air shimmered. For a split second, the space in front of him was empty. The next, she was there. She was small, deceptively so. Her black uniform was sleeveless, showing toned, wiry arms. Her hair was braided, and her face was a mask of aristocratic coldness. Her dark eyes narrowed into chips of obsidian. She radiated an authority that was absolute and a spiritual pressure that was focused and sharp as the blade of a guillotine. It was a stark contrast to his own explosive, chaotic presence. She took in the scene with a single, contemptuous glance. The crater where he had landed, the terrified souls cowering in the buildings, and him, the epicenter of it all. Her expression hardened from disdain to pure, unadulterated fury. This was an intruder, a monster, a chaotic element that had violated the sanctity of her world. Her hand was a blur. The blade she held, a short, straight wakizashi, was suddenly at his throat, the razor-sharp edge kissing his skin. The cold steel was a grounding sensation in the chaos of his mind. He didn't flinch. He didn't even blink. His eyes, no longer the bright, innocent blue of a child but something deeper and more ancient, met hers. In the silent, monochrome world that was now his second sight, he saw her. Her life thread was a brilliant, fierce gold, wrapped so tightly with silver threads of duty and onyx black threads of grief and resentment that it was almost completely obscured. She was a fortress, built to keep the world out and to keep something broken locked within. Her voice was like ice, clipped, precise, and filled with lethal promise. On your knees, intruder. It wasn't a request. It was a statement of what would happen. Identify yourself, your name and your affiliation. Naruto looked at the blade at his throat, then back into her furious eyes. He had no answers for her. Konoha, Genin, ninja. Those words felt like they belonged to a different person, a different lifetime. He was a boy who had died in a forest and been reborn as something else. The only truth he had left was his own profound confusion. He spoke, his voice quiet, devoid of its usual boisterous energy. It was a calm, clear tone that was more unsettling to her than any scream or threat would have been. Who am I? He repeated her unasked question, his gaze unwavering. I don't know. The words hung in the air, a statement of such impossible ignorance that it could only be a lie or a truth more terrifying than any lie. For Soi Fon, captain of the 2nd Division and commander-in-chief of the Onmitsukido, it was the ultimate mockery. Her eyes narrowed, the fury within them solidifying into a simple, deadly resolve. The pressure of the blade on his neck increased, a hair's breadth from drawing blood. Chapter 1 End. Chapter 2. The ghost of the Seraite Soi Fon's rage was a perfectly forged thing. It was not the wild, hot fury of a common brawler, but a cold, dense, diamond-hard anger honed by a lifetime of discipline and unforgiving standards. It was the anger of a perfect system encountering a perfect flaw. And the flaw was the boy standing before her, whose calm was a greater insult than any defiance. Her words, I don't know, echoed in the sudden, crushing silence of the Rukongai street. A statement so absurd it could only be a calculated taunt. The pressure of her wakizashi increased. A single, perfect crimson bead welled up on Naruto's neck, a stark jewel against his skin. This was the moment of submission. The moment the prey acknowledged the predator. She had seen it 1,000 times. The flicker of fear, the desperate plea, the frantic surge of useless power. She saw none of it. Naruto's eyes, Those unsettlingly deep pools didn't even focus on the blade. They were focused on her. He was watching her, studying her, with an intensity that made the fine hairs on her arms stand on end. In the space between one heartbeat and the next, he moved. It wasn't shunpo. It wasn't speed. It was a negation. One moment, his throat was on her blade. The next, he was standing 2 feet to his left. The space he had occupied now holding nothing but empty air. There had been no blur, no flicker, no whisper of displaced wind. It was as if the world had blinked, and in that blink, reality had been edited. Her blade, which should have sliced through his neck as he moved, met only the ghost of his presence. The sheer impossibility of it sent a jolt of ice through her veins. "I don't have time for games, intruder," she bit out, her voice dangerously low. She spun, her form a black blur, blade arcing in a silver flash aimed to bisect him. It was a movement that had ended. Hundreds of hollows and more than a few traitors. Again, he was simply not there. He hadn't dodged. He had taken a single, calm step backward, a motion that should have been far too slow. Yet her blade cut through empty air once more. He was now 5 feet away, his hands hanging loosely at his sides. "This isn't a game," he said, and his quiet voice carried with unnatural clarity. He looked at her, then at the masked members of the Onmitsukido surrounding them. He saw the shimmering silver threads of their coordinated attack vectors, a beautiful, deadly web of intersecting lines all converging on his position. He saw the thread of Soi Fon's next shunpo before her muscles had even begun to tense. "He's yours," Soi Fon commanded, her fury spiking. "Subdue him. Do not let him escape." The pack moved. 20 elite assassins, the pride of the Seraite, converged as one. They were a symphony of silent, deadly motion. But to Naruto, they were a cacophony. Their movements, while silent to the ear, screamed along the lines of the tapestry only he could see. He saw every feint, every lunge, every flanking maneuver laid out before him like a diagram. He sank. It was the only word for it. He didn't duck or crouch. He simply lowered himself into his own shadow, the darkness on the dusty ground seeming to deepen and swallow him whole. The Onmitsukido patrol collided in the center of their circle. A tangle of limbs and surprised grunts as their target vanished completely. Soi Fon's eyes widened. She stared at the spot, her spiritual senses straining. He was gone. Not hidden. Not suppressed. The dual pressures, the hot rage and the cold void, had vanished as if a switch had been flipped. "Report," she snapped, her gaze sweeping the rooftops. "No sign, Commander," a voice called from above. "West side clear. No spiritual trace. He's vanished." Soi Fon's jaw clenched so hard she felt a tooth grind. Vanished. Impossible. No one could erase their presence so completely from a being of her caliber. Not even Lady Yoruichi in her prime could. She cut the thought off, the memory a bitter poison. A few yards away, a sliver of darkness in the deep shadow of a dilapidated doorway elongated, stretched. And then Naruto stepped out of it as casually as if he were stepping through a curtain. He was utterly silent. The dust on the ground didn't stir. He took a moment, his gaze distant. His new senses trying to make sense of this strange, tiered city. He could feel the energy of it, the colossal, sleeping power of the walled fortress that loomed in the distance. That was the Seraite, he realized. And that was where the answers were. He started to move, a silent ghost in the twilight of the Rukongai. He didn't run. He flowed, his movements economical and precise. He kept to the shadows. His body a phantom that the eye simply slid past. He felt a flicker of energy behind him and glanced back. Soi Fon had appeared on a rooftop, her sharp eyes scanning, her body a taut line of incandescent rage. She hadn't seen him, but she had sensed the brief disturbance his re-emergence had caused. She was good, annoyingly good. The chase was on. It was not a desperate flight. For Naruto, it was an education. He moved through the winding, chaotic streets of the 78th district, a place of poverty and quiet desperation. The transparent souls of the residents watched him pass, their FAI. Spiritual flames flickering with fear from the earlier pressure wave. They were no threat. They were barely there at all. The Onmitsukido were a different matter. They were a persistent, buzzing threat. They appeared on rooftops, their movements synchronized, trying to box him in. But he saw their paths, the lines of their intent. Before their net could close, he would slip through a gap they didn't even know existed. He'd step into the shadow of a water barrel and emerge from the darkness under a market stall 50 feet away. He reached the great wall of the Seraite. It was a colossal barrier of white stone that seemed to absorb spiritual energy, designed to repel intruders. For Naruto, it was just another surface. He placed a hand on it, and the shadow beneath his palm deepened. He pushed, and his hand sank into the stone as if it were water. He pulled himself through, the sensation a cold, brief pressure, and emerged on the other side. He was in. The air here was different. Cleaner, sharper. The spiritual energy was dense, ordered, humming with a disciplined power that was a universe away from the chaotic Rukongai. The architecture was pristine, all white-walled compounds, perfectly raked gravel gardens, and soaring pagodas. And it was crawling with Shinigami. He could feel them, hundreds of them, their spiritual fires ranging from faint embers to strong, steady flames. A new wave of pursuers was already on him. These were not the masked assassins, but uniformed Shinigami, likely from the patrol corps. They were slower, clumsier, their intentions broadcast like signal flares in his perception. He didn't even bother with the shadows. He simply moved. He walked through a courtyard as a squad ran past him, their eyes seeing nothing. He stepped to the side as a sensor type tried to pinpoint his location. The man's senses sliding right over him. He was a blind spot in the world. This was his new power. The dominion of silence, of non-existence. He could simply choose not to be perceived. But Soi Fon was a different kind of problem. He was crossing a wide, moonlit bridge over a silent canal when she appeared. A flicker of movement, a spike of pressure, and she was standing at the opposite end of the bridge, her arms crossed, her expression glacial. "You are fast," she stated, her voice carrying across the 50-foot gap. "But you are sloppy. You left a trail a child could follow." Naruto stopped. He cocked his head. He had left no trail. No scent. No sound. No spiritual residue. What was she talking about? Then he saw it. In the grayscale world of his second sight, he saw a faint, shimmering trail of motes of light hanging in the air where he had been. It was a residue of his own unique energy, the chaotic fusion of the Kyuubi and the divine. It was faint, almost imperceptible. But to a master tracker, it was a glowing highway. Soi Fon pushed off, her body blurring. This was Shunpo. He saw the thread of her path, a straight, perfect line of Veer energy designed to cross the bridge in an instant. He didn't try to meet it. He didn't try to dodge. He reached out his hand and plucked a different thread. Not one of hers, but one belonging to the bridge itself. The thread of stillness. He severed it. The large, ornate stone lantern at the exact midpoint of the bridge, which had stood unmoving for centuries, suddenly toppled over. It crashed onto the walkway with a sound like a thunderclap, directly in the path of Soi Fon's Shunpo. She reacted with breathtaking speed, twisting her body in midair to avoid the unexpected obstacle, landing gracefully on the railing of the bridge. But her momentum was broken. Her perfect, instantaneous charge had been interrupted. She stared at the fallen lantern, then at Naruto, a flicker of genuine disbelief in her eyes. It was a coincidence. It had to be. There was no Kido, no technique that could simply make something fall over. Lucky, she snarled, and lunged again, this time from the railing, a far more complex vector. Naruto was already moving. He was learning. His own energy was a liability. But the world around him was a weapon. The chase resumed, now a frantic, high-speed blur across the rooftops of the Seraite. Soi Fon was relentless, a hawk chasing a phantom. She was faster, her raw speed undeniable. But it didn't matter. Naruto was always one step ahead, not in speed, but in time. He knew where she would be before she did. He'd leap from a roof just as she appeared behind him. He'd duck into an alley an instant before she brought her blade down on the space he had occupied. It was infuriating. It was like fighting a ghost who could read her mind. Spread out, she barked into the air, her voice tight with a frustration she hadn't felt in years. Use the Seraite net. Box him in Sector 7 Gamma. All squads, converge. She could feel her Onmitsukido responding, their movements shifting, creating a massive, closing perimeter miles wide. He could run, but he could NT escaped the cage they were building around him. Naruto felt the shift in their strategy. The threads of their intent were no longer just chasing. They were building walls, a complex, three-dimensional grid of spiritual pressure and physical bodies. It was impressive, methodical, and it was exactly what he wanted. He was no longer just evading. He was now guiding. He led them through the sprawling barracks of the 11th Division. A place of loud, boorish energy and crude architecture, a stark contrast to the rest of the Seraite. He heard the shouts and challenges of the brutes inside, but he slipped past them like a whisper. He moved through the gardens of the 4th Division, a place of serene, healing energy. The air was thick with restorative Kido, and for a moment, it soothed the chaotic clash within him. As he moved, he noticed something odd. A patch of the pristine white wall of a clinic seemed wrong. In his grayscale vision, the threads of its existence were bunched and knotted, stitched together with a faint, oily black cord that didn't belong. It hummed with a discordant note, a trap disguised as mundane reality. He felt a primal, instinctual revulsion to it and veered away, his path taking him wide around the corrupted space. A moment later, two of Soi Fon's subordinates, flashing past in pursuit, got too close. The wall dissolved, not into dust, but into a swirling vortex of screaming faces and grasping hands, a miniature portal to some forgotten, hungry hell. The two Shinigami were sucked in before they could even scream, their own life threads violently snipped from the tapestry. The vortex vanished, and the wall was pristine once more. Naruto stopped, hidden in the shadow of a willow tree, his blood running cold. That wasn't a Shinigami technique. That was something else, something alien. He remembered the brief, terrifying vision he'd had while falling between worlds, the loom, and the shadowy weaver. He had been followed. The thought was a shard of ice in his gut. This wasn't just a chase. He was being hunted by more than just the Shinigami. Soi Fon arrived on the scene a second later. She saw the empty space where two of her best should have been. Her senses told her they were gone. Not dead. Gone. Erased. She looked at the wall, her face pale. No trace. No residue. Her eyes scanned the area, and for a brief second, her gaze met Naruto's hiding place. He didn't see anger in her eyes now. He saw a flicker of cold, professional fear. The fear of an unknown variable. She thought he had done it. This had to end. He couldn't keep running. He needed to control the narrative. He needed to make them listen. He felt the net closing. They were herding him towards a large, open area. A massive training ground, he deduced from the energy of the place. It was pockmarked with craters and scarred with the memory of 1,000 battles. It was a kill box. Perfect. Instead of fighting the current, he let it carry him. He allowed them to spot him, a brief, calculated flicker of his presence. The hunt intensified, the circle shrinking, the threads of intent all converging on the training ground. He was the fox, and they believed they were finally driving him into the open. He reached the edge of the vast, circular field. It was empty, a barren expanse of packed earth under the cold light of the moon, dotted with thick wooden sparring posts. He didn't run across it. He walked to the very center of the field, stopped, and turned. He let the shadows recede from his form, dropped the veil of silence, and just stood there. He allowed his spiritual pressure to become a beacon. The twin energies of the fox and the void washing out in a silent, palpable wave. It was a challenge, a statement. I am here. Come and get me. One by one, they appeared. Figures flickering into existence at the perimeter of the training ground. The masked Onmitsukido, their white masks looking like skulls in the moonlight. And at their head, Soi Fon. She landed lightly, 50 feet away. Her wakizashi held in a reverse grip. Her breathing was controlled, but he could see the tension in her shoulders, the fury and confusion warring in her eyes. Nowhere left to run, intruder, she said. Her voice dangerously soft. Behind her, a much larger, bulkier figure landed with a heavy thump that sent up a cloud of dust. He was a mountain of a man with a ridiculous topknot and thick lips. Carrying a colossal, spiked gauntlet on his arm. Finally got the rat cornered, Captain. The big man boomed, his voice grating and arrogant. Just give me the word, and I'll crush him into a paste. My Reikoho is itching for a workout. This was her lieutenant, Marekio Omaeda. Naruto saw his life thread. A thick, gaudy yellow, tangled with threads of cowardice, greed, and misplaced pride. A buffoon. Naruto's gaze flickered to Omaeda, then back to Soi Fon. He ignored the lieutenant completely. "You've been chasing me all over your city," Naruto said, his voice calm and even. "You've lost subordinates to traps that weren't of my making. And you still haven't asked a single useful question." Omaeda bristled. "Who does this little punk think he is, talking to the captain like that? I'll teach you some respect." He started to lumber forward. Naruto didn't even look at him. His eyes remained locked on Soi Fon. He lifted one hand, his fingers slightly curled, and made a subtle, barely perceptible plucking motion in the air. Omaeda, in mid-stride, suddenly yelped. His feet, which had been firmly planted, tangled with each other as if they belonged to two different people. He stumbled, pinwheeled his arms wildly, and crashed face first into the dirt with a groaning thud, 10 feet from where he started. He had tripped over absolutely nothing. The surrounding Onmitsukido froze. Soi Fon's eyes narrowed. It was the same phenomenon as the lantern on the bridge. A localized, inexplicable violation of physics. "My question was, who are you?" Soi Fon said, her voice lethally sharp. "You have yet to provide a satisfactory answer." "And my answer was, I don't know," Naruto replied, his patience wearing thin. "It's the truth. Is the truth not satisfactory in this place?" He took a deliberate step forward. "Let me ask a better question. Why are you so determined to kill something you don't understand?" "Everything I don't understand that enters the Arite without permission is a threat to be eliminated," she countered, her doctrine absolute. "That is the law. That is my duty." "Your duty cost you 2 of your people tonight," Naruto stated flatly. "They didn't die because of me. They died because of a trap that was set for me. There is something else hunting me. Something that used your chase to its advantage." Her expression flickered. Doubt. It was a tiny crack in her fortress of certainty. She had felt the wrongness of her subordinate's disappearance. But admitting it, trusting the word of this anomaly, was impossible. "Lies," she hissed. But the word lacked its earlier conviction. "You'll say anything to save your own skin. I could have been gone hours ago," Naruto said, his voice dropping, taking on a new edge of command. "I could have killed your clumsy lieutenant in that alleyway near the north wall. I could have slit the throats of the 2 archers you posted on the eastern gate. They never would have seen me. I didn't. I am not your enemy." He let the words hang in the cold air. "But I'm done running. I need answers. Where am I? What is this place? And how do I get home?" The sheer audacity of it, the absolute confidence of his tone, left her momentarily speechless. He wasn't pleading. He was demanding. He, the cornered intruder, was dictating terms to the commander of the Onmitsukido. It was at that moment, in that charged silence, that the stakes changed. 3 new pressures descended upon the training ground. They were not the uniform, disciplined presence of the Onmitsukido. These were titans. One was cold, vast, and silent as a winter snowfall, carrying an ancient, unbending pride. A figure appeared in a flicker of cherry blossoms, a tall man with noble features, dark hair adorned with intricate kenseiken, and eyes that held a chilling indifference. Captain Byakuya Kuchiki of the 6th Division. The second was warm, lazy, and vast as a summer sky, smelling faintly of sake. He wore a pink flower Ed Howery over his captain's uniform and a conical straw hat. Captain Shunsui Kiraku of the 8th Division. The third was gentle, warm, but tinged with a persistent, underlying frailty, like a great fire banked by illness. A white-haired man with a kind, sad face, who coughed lightly into his sleeve as he appeared beside Shunsui. Captain Jashiro Yukitaki of the 13th Division. They didn't appear at the perimeter. They appeared inside the circle, standing between Soi Fon and Naruto, their presence fundamentally altering the equation. Shunsui tipped his hat back, his gaze lingering on Naruto with lazy curiosity. My, Soi Fon-chan. You've certainly cornered a lively one. It's been a while since anyone led the secret mobile corps on such a merry chase across the whole of Seraite. Byakuya's cold gaze swept over Naruto, taking in the strange, dual-natured spiritual pressure, the tattered orange jumpsuit that was so alien to their world, and the unnatural calm in his eyes. "You have failed to dispose of the Ryoka, Captain Soi Fon," he stated, his voice devoid of inflection. It was not an accusation, merely a fact. The situation has escalated. Soi Fon's knuckles were white where she gripped her blade. The humiliation was a burning coal in her stomach. Her operation, her authority, had been superseded. Yukatake offered Naruto a gentle, placating smile. There's no need for any more fighting. We just want to talk. Clearly, there has been a great misunderstanding. Naruto looked at the three new arrivals. He saw their threads. The nobles was a complex weave of silver duty and icy blue pride, wrapped around a core of conflicted love. The lazy one was a deceptive tangle of soft pinks and grays, concealing a core of razor-sharp steel. The sick one was a brilliant, warm white, frayed and weakened, but shining with an indomitable kindness. They were powerful, on a level that dwarfed Soi Fon. But he was no longer just a genin from Konoha. He was something else, something that saw the strings behind the puppets. He relaxed his stance, letting his hands fall to his sides. He had chosen his ground. He had gotten their attention. The chase was over. The interrogation was about to begin. The intruder was no longer just Soi Fon's problem. He was a problem for the entire Gote 13. Chapter 2 End. Chapter 3. The weight of a soul. The air in the 1st Division Assembly Hall was ancient and heavy. It felt compressed by the weight of 1,000 years of history, of countless judgments passed and wars declared. The room was vast and austere, its dark wooden floors polished to a mirror shine, reflecting the stoic, disciplined lines of the assembled captains of the Gote 13. They stood in 2 rows, a living gallery of the most powerful souls in existence, their spiritual pressures a silent, overwhelming chorus. Some regarded him with cold curiosity, others with open hostility, and a few with a veiled interest that was perhaps the most dangerous of all. Naruto stood alone in the center of the hall, the doors having closed behind him with a boom that echoed like a death knell. He wasn't shackled or bound. They hadn't even tried. There was a tacit understanding that physical restraints would be meaningless. His prison was the combined spiritual weight of the captains and the absolute authority of the man who sat before him. At the far end of the hall, on a simple elevated platform, sat Captain Commander Genryusai Shigekuni Yamamoto. He was a wizened, ancient man, his eyes closed, his gnarled hands resting on the head of his simple wooden cane. He seemed frail, a relic of a bygone era. But Naruto's new senses told a different story. In the world of threads, Yamamoto was not a man. He was a star, a condensed, blazing sun of pure, incandescent power, its life. Thread, a colossal pillar of fire that seemed to hold up the very roof of the Seraite. The air around him was warped by its sheer intensity. It was the most terrifying and magnificent thing Naruto had ever seen. Beside him, almost hidden in his radiant presence, stood Captain Retsu Unohana of the 4th Division. Her gentle, braided appearance and serene smile were a stark contrast to the power Naruto could perceive humming beneath her skin. Her life thread was a deep, tranquil green, but woven within it, almost completely hidden, was a thread of pure, blood-soaked crimson, so dark and dense it seemed to drink the light. A healer with the soul of a killer. Yamamoto's eyes snapped open. They were not the tired eyes of an old man, but the sharp, piercing gaze of a hawk, holding an authority had commanded armies and shaped history. The ambient pressure in the room intensified tenfold, a physical force that sought to bring Naruto to his knees. Naruto did not kneel. He met the old man's gaze. His own calm, a quiet island in the crushing ocean of Yamamoto's Ryutsu. He felt the clash of power within him, the Kyuubi's furious, instinctual urge to roar back in defiance, and the cold, silent void of his new power that simply absorbed the pressure, rendering it inert. You have caused a considerable disturbance, Ryoka. Yamamoto's voice was a low, rumbling baritone, like grinding stones. It was not loud, but it filled the hall, each word imbued with an unshakable power. You have evaded and humiliated the Onmitsukido. You have trespassed in the Seraite. And you have brought with you a spiritual signature the likes of which has not been felt in a millennium. You will account for yourself. You will begin with your name. The silence that followed was absolute. Every captain waited. My name is Naruto Uzumaki, he said, his voice clear and steady. The name felt strange on his tongue, a relic from another life, but it was his. Uzumaki. A new voice murmured, tinged with scientific curiosity. It came from a man with bizarre, striped headwear and a predatory grin, Captain Mayuri Kuretsuchi of the 12th Division. An interesting name. Of no known noble house. No recorded soul. I am not a soul. Naruto stated plainly. I am alive. Or I was. I come from a world called the Elemental Nations. I am a shinobi of the Hidden Leaf Village. A ripple of murmurs went through the assembled captains. A living human. Here, it was not unheard of, but for one to appear so violently, with such immense power, was unprecedented. A living human cannot cross the veil between worlds unaided. Captain Kuchiki's cold voice cut through the noise. You are lying. I didn't do it on purpose, Naruto said, his gaze returning to Yamamoto. He recounted the events in the Forest of Death, his voice devoid of emotion. A simple recitation of facts. He spoke of the pale man with the snake eyes, the fight, the collapse of his teammate, and the final, desperate moment. When he described the awakening, the world turning to monochrome, the appearance of the threads, a few of the captains shifted, their expressions sharpening. Captain Kyoraku's lazy smile tightened. Captain Yukitaki's gentle face became serious. I reached out, Naruto continued, holding up his hand, and I severed the thread of his technique. The backlash of that power, combined with something sealed inside me, tore a hole in my world. I fell through. Sealed. Yamamoto's eyes narrowed. The chaotic, violent energy that pours from you. It feels like a hollow, yet it is not. Explain. Naruto's hand drifted to his stomach. Over the faint outline of the seal on his jumpsuit. The nine-tailed fox. A creature of immense chakra, a biju. It was sealed inside me on the day I was born. The revelation landed like a bomb. A Jinchuriki. A human host for a demon. It was a concept so alien to the Shinigami that it bordered on the nonsensical. But it explained the raw, untamed nature of one half of his spiritual pressure. And this other power? Hana asked, her voice soft and melodious, yet carrying an edge that demanded the truth. This ability to sever what you call threads. What is it? Naruto hesitated. He had no name for it. He only knew how it felt. It's silence and shadow. It's the power to see the connections between things. And to unmake them. He decided to show them. He looked past the captains, his gaze settling on one of the large, ornate torches that lit the hall. It burned with a bright, steady flame. In his grayscale vision, he saw the shimmering thread of heat that defined the fire. He lifted a finger and, with a thought, made a cutting motion in the air. The flame on the torch across the hall instantly vanished. Not snuffed out, not extinguished with a wisp of smoke. It simply ceased to exist. The wick was left cold and pristine, as if it had never been lit. A collective intake of breath swept through the hall. Mayuri Kuretsuchi's grin widened into a manic leer, his eyes ally. Chi with a terrifying hunger for knowledge. Captain Tosen, the blind man, turned his head slightly, as if he could hear the sound of a law of nature being broken. Soi Fon, standing stiffly at the back of the line, felt a cold dread pool in her stomach. That was what he had done to the lantern. To Omeida's footing. It wasn't luck. It was control. Ho, Yamamoto murmured, his ancient eyes glowing with a dangerous light. To unmake a concept, such as the domain of gods. I'm not a god, Naruto said quickly. I don't know what I am. All I know is that I was followed here. He told them about the trap in the 4th Division's compound. The wall that had erased 2 of Soi Fon's subordinates. It wasn't a Shinigami technique. It felt stitched wrong. It was a trap meant for me. Something is hunting beings with this kind of power. Yamamoto was silent for a long, tense minute, his fingers drumming a slow, deliberate rhythm on his cane. The captains waited, their collective will bend to his. Your story is outlandish, the captain commander finally declared. Your existence is an anomaly that violates every law of the Seraite. The energies you wield are a threat to the balance of souls. By all rights, you should be dissected by the 12th Division for study, and your constituent parts erased. Mayuri's grin became ecstatic. However, Yamamoto continued, silencing him with a glance, the potential loss of 2 Onmitsukido members to an unknown enemy on our soil cannot be ignored. And your power, if it can be controlled, represents an asset of immeasurable value. He fixed Naruto with a look that was both a warning and an offer. Therefore, a verdict has been reached. Naruto Uzumaki, you will be placed under probationary custody. You will be housed, trained, and observed. You will be studied, and your allegiance will be tested. Your guardian and warden will be the captain with the most expertise in dealing with assassins, spies, and other covert threats. A cold dread washed over Soi Fon. She knew what was coming. Captain Soi Fon of the 2nd Division, Yamamoto's voice boomed. This Ryoka is now your responsibility. You will watch him. You will test him. You will determine if he is a tool to be wielded or a threat to be eliminated. His life is in your hands. Do you accept this charge? Soi Fon's body went rigid. It was an honor, and it was the deepest insult. She was being ordered to babysit the very creature who had made a mockery of her entire core. It was a test of her loyalty, a punishment for her failure, and a strategic move all in one. Swallowing her pride, which tasted like ash and bile, she stepped forward and knelt. "Hi, Sotaicho," she said, her voice a perfectly controlled monotone that betrayed none of the fury raging within her. "I accept." "Then it is done," Yamamoto declared. He slammed the butt of his cane onto the floor, the sound of final, absolute judgment. This assembly is dismissed. The walk to the 2nd Division barracks was a silent war. Soi Fon led the way. Her back ramrod straight, her pace punishingly fast. Naruto followed a few steps behind, his hands in his pockets, easily keeping pace. He could feel her anger radiating off her in waves, a contained, simmering inferno. The other Shinigami they passed in the pristine streets of the Seraite stared at him, the strange Ryoka in the tattered orange jumpsuit, being personally courted by the notoriously merciless commander of the Onmitsukido. The 2nd Division compound was a fortress within a fortress. Its walls were high and black, its design functional and severe. There were no gardens, no ornamentation. It was a place of shadows and secrets. The Shinigami within moved with a silent, disciplined grace that spoke of relentless training. They all stopped and bowed as Soi Fon passed, their masked or uncovered faces betraying nothing, but their collective gaze on Naruto was heavy with suspicion and resentment. He was the reason for their humiliation. Soi Fon led him not to a cell, but to a small, sparse room in a secluded wing of the main barracks. It contained a simple sleeping mat, a low table, and a single window that looked out onto a stark training courtyard. "This will be your quarters," she said. Her voice clipped. "You will not leave this room without my permission. You will not speak to anyone without my permission. You will do exactly as I say, when I say it. Is that clear?" "Crystal," Naruto replied, his casual tone a stark contrast to her rigid formality. He walked to the window and looked out. "You're angry." The observation was so blunt, so obvious, that it momentarily threw her off. "My feelings are irrelevant to my duty." "Are they?" He turned to face her. "You feel like you failed. Like I made a fool of you and your people. And now the OLD man has rubbed your nose in it by making you my keeper. You're angry at him, and you're angry at me." Her control finally snapped. "You know nothing of my feelings, intruder." She spat, her hand instinctively going to the hilt of her blade. "You are a chaotic, undisciplined variable. A monster wearing a child's face. My duty is to contain you, and if necessary, to put you down. Do not mistake this for anything else." Before she could continue her tirade, the air inside the sealed compound suddenly warped. A shriek of tearing metal and splintering wood echoed from the central courtyard. Ts of alarm erupted from her subordinates. Soi Fon was gone in a flicker of shunpo. Naruto was right behind her, a silent shadow that kept pace effortlessly. They burst out into the main training yard to a scene of carnage. Half a dozen members of her corps were down, their bodies mangled, bleeding on the stone pavers. In the center of the yard stood a figure, its presence a discordant shriek in the orderly energy of the Seraite. It was tall and unnaturally thin, wrapped in dirty beige bandages from head to toe, leaving not an inch of skin visible. Its movements were jerky and spasmodic, like a marionette with a drunk puppeteer. It held no blade. Its posture was hunched, its head twitching from side to side. And it radiated the same, stitched wrong, energy as the trap in the 4th Division, but 100 times more potent. "A hollow," one of the standing Onmitsukido members hissed, taking a defensive stance. "No," Soi Fon breathed, her eyes wide with lethal focus. "Something else." The bandaged figure's head snapped towards her. It emitted no sound, but a wave of psychic pressure washed over them, a feeling of utter desolation and emptiness. It lunged, its speed rivaling Soi Fon's own shunpo. It didn't aim for her, but for one of her injured subordinates lying on the ground. Soi Fon moved to intercept, her blade a silver streak. But the creature was faster. Just as it was about to reach the downed Shinigami, a black shape interposed itself. Naruto. He hadn't drawn a weapon. He simply stood there, planting his feet, and caught the creature's outstretched arm in his hand. The impact created a shockwave that cracked the flagstones beneath his feet. He didn't even slide back an inch. The creature struggled, its inhuman strength immense. It was like trying to restrain a force of nature. But Naruto's grip was absolute. "This is what I was talking about," he said, his voice grim, his eyes fixed on the bandaged thing. "This is one of them. A hunter." The creature let out a silent scream of frustration. Its other hand shot out, aiming for Naruto's face. He simply turned his head, letting the blow sail past his ear. With his free hand, he reached for the creature's chest. He wasn't aiming for a physical target. In his monochrome vision, he saw it. A chaotic, ugly knot of oily black threads at the center of the creature's form. It was a parasite, an anchor. It was the source of its power. He plunged his hand into its chest. His fingers passed through the bandages and flesh as if they were smoke. The creature froze. Soi Fon and her subordinates watched in stunned horror. Naruto's arm was buried to the elbow in the monster's torso, yet there was no blood, no wound. He found the knot of threads. He clenched his fist. And he pulled. The bandaged creature convulsed. A true scream, a sound of pure, unadulterated agony, ripped from it. It was a sound that didn't belong in a physical throat, a shriek that echoed on a psychic plane. A torrent of black, viscous energy poured out of its mouth and eyes. Not like blood, but like unraveling code. Naruto ripped his hand back, and in his fist, he held a writhing, screeching orb of pure darkness, shot through with flickering, corrupted data. It was the creature's core. The herald's connection to its master. The bandaged body, its power source gone, simply crumbled. It fell apart like a statue of dry sand, dissolving into a pile of lifeless gray dust and empty cloth wrappings. Naruto looked at the squirming black orb in his hand. It was trying to bite him, to infect him, but the cold void of his own divine power neutralized its efforts. He could hear it whispering in his mind, a voice of static and hatred. Aberration. The weaver sees. The tapestry will be cleansed. Aberration. He closed his hand, and the orb imploded with a soft pop. Vanishing into nothing. The courtyard was silent, save for the groans of the injured. Naruto stood over the pile of dust, his breathing even. He had just faced a Kriatu that had incapacitated 6 elite assassins in seconds and dismantled it with an ease that was profoundly terrifying. He turned to look at Soi Fon. Her face was a pale mask of shock, her perfect control shattered. Her subordinates were staring at him, not with resentment anymore, but with a raw, primal awe. He hadn't just fought. He had performed an exorcism. He had saved their lives. "Now," Naruto said, his voice quiet but carrying the weight of his actions. "Do you believe me?" Soi Fon stared from the pile of dust to the injured men being tended by their comrades, then back to the boy who stood there. His hand still faintly smoking with the residue of the destroyed core. He was an anomaly, a monster, but he had just protected her division. He had just validated his impossible story in the most violent and undeniable way possible. Her duty was to contain him. Her duty was to the Seraite. But her eyes, for the first time, saw not just an intruder, but a potential shield against AT. Reach she couldn't even begin to comprehend. Her answer was not verbal. She simply gave him a short, sharp nod. It was a concession, an acknowledgement, the beginning of a trust forged not in words, but in the shared crucible of a battle against the unknown. The dynamic had shifted. He was no longer just her prisoner. He was her problem, and, just maybe, her solution. Chapter 3 End. Chapter 4. The shape of a shadow. The days that followed settled into a strange and tense rhythm. The 2nd Division compound, once a place of rigid, predictable order, now orbited a new, chaotic sun, Naruto Uzumaki. He was a prisoner who held no cell, a charge who felt more like a keeper. He kept to his Spartan room, as ordered, but his presence was a palpable thing that permeated the entire fortress. The members of the Onmitsukido, who once viewed him with pure animosity, now watched him with a complex mixture of fear, grudging respect, and a deep, unsettling curiosity. They had seen what he could do. They had seen him unmake a monster that had torn through their ranks like paper. They kept their distance. Soi Fon's supervision was relentless. It was her only outlet for the swirling vortex of frustration, confusion, and a burgeoning, unwilling respect that now defined her existence. She couldn't kill him. She couldn't trust him. So, she would test him. Every day, she would appear at his door. As the pale morning light touched the seraite, her face an unreadable mask. Training yard. Now, their sparring sessions became the focal point of the division. They were not friendly matches. They were silent, brutal interrogations conducted with fists and feet. Soi Fon was a whirlwind of controlled violence. Her movements were blurs, her strikes precise and deadly. She came at him with the full force of her Hakuda. Each palm heel strike meant to shatter bone, each kick aimed to cripple. She was testing his limits, searching for a weakness, trying to understand the nature of the beast she had been tasked with leashing. She never landed a clean hit. Naruto didn't need to be faster than her. Speed was irrelevant when you could perceive intent. In his monochrome world, her attacks were telephone, graphed by brilliant silver threads of motion. Before her foot could lash out, he knew its exact trajectory. Before her hand could strike, he saw the path it would take. His evasions were maddeningly simple. A slight turn of the shoulder, a small step to the side, a subtle dip of his head. He moved just enough, expending the absolute minimum amount of energy necessary. He was a rock in a raging river, allowing her furious current to flow around him. Fight back, she snarled one morning, after a flurry of strikes that had all met empty air. She was breathing heavily, a sheen of sweat on her brow. He was perfectly still, his breathing even, not a single hair out of place. "I'm not your enemy," he replied calmly, his hands still loosely at his sides. "I have nothing to gain by hurting you. You think this is a game." She lunged, feinting a high kick and dropping into a low sweep meant to take his legs out from under him. This time, he didn't just evade. As her legs swept through the space where he had been, he dropped a hand and pressed two fingers against the top of her thigh. He didn't push, he didn't strike, he simply touched, and severed the thread of her momentum. Soi Fon's body, poised for a fluid, spinning recovery, suddenly went limp. Her muscles, expecting to carry the force of her sweep, found that force gone. She stumbled, her perfect balance gone, and crashed to the ground in an undignified heap. Silence. The handful of Onmitsukido members watching from the shadows froze. Their commander, the master of Hakuda, had been felled without a single blow being struck. Soi Fon was on her feet in an instant, her face flushed with a mixture of humiliation and sheer disbelief. She stared at him, her chest heaving. He hadn't beaten her. He had edited her. How? She breathed, the word a mix of fury and genuine curiosity. "Your movements are perfect," Naruto said, his tone one of genuine admiration, not mockery. "The form, the discipline, it's flawless. But it's predictable. You rely on patterns of attack that have worked 1,000 times. You don't need to be faster than the pattern. You just need to understand it." He was critiquing her, the captain of the 2nd Division. And the worst part was, he was right. She fought with the cold logic of an assassin, but he fought with the insight of a philosopher. He saw the flash of fury in her eyes and decided to change tactics. "Show me," he said. "Show you what?" She bit out. "The forms, the patterns, your Hakuda. It's beautiful. I want to learn." The request was so unexpected it disarmed her. He wasn't mocking her. His eyes held a genuine, scholarly interest. The student asking the master. It was a subtle shift in the dynamic, one that appealed to the part of her that was a commander, a teacher. Hesitantly, warily, she began to demonstrate the foundational katas of her clan's fighting style. And he learned. He learned with an aptitude that was terrifying. He mirrored her movements perfectly after seeing them only once. But he didn't just copy them. He absorbed the principles behind them. Within hours, he was not just defending against her attacks but incorporating her own style into his evasions. Moving with a fluid grace that was a bizarre fusion of her rigid perfection and his own unpredictable nature. The dynamic of their supervision began to change. The brutal tests became genuine training sessions. The animosity, while still present, was now underscored by grudging, unspoken partnership. He would push her, challenging her to break from her rigid forms, to be unpredictable. She, in turn, honed his raw, instinctual movements, giving them a sharp, deadly edge. They were forging each other into better fighters. One evening, after a particularly grueling session, they sat on the edge of the Ngawa overlooking the silent training yard. The sun was setting, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple that were a stark contrast to the severe black and white of the compound. Soi Fon was cleaning her wakizashi with a piece of silk, her movements precise and meditative. Naruto was quiet, watching her. He noticed the emblem on the back of her haori, the one she wore over her uniform when not in combat. It was a delicate, 5-petaled flower, but his eyes were drawn to a smaller, almost hidden detail. A tiny, exquisitely stitched butterfly, hovering near the flower's edge. He had seen her trace its outline with her finger when she thought no one was looking. In his grayscale vision, the butterfly was not just thread. It was a focal point, a nexus for the tangled, onyx black threads of grief and abandonment that were wound so tightly around her soul. It was a symbol of a wound that had never healed. He didn't know the story. He didn't know about Yoruichi Shihoin. He didn't need to. He could see the shape of the pain. "It's hard," he said, his voice soft, not looking at her. "When someone you build your world around just leaves. It makes you feel like the foundations were made of sand." Soi Fon's hands froze. The silk cloth fell from her fingers. Her head snapped up, her eyes wide, vulnerable for the first time since he'd met her. He had struck the very core of her being with the accuracy of a master sniper. It was more jarring than any physical blow she had ever taken. She started, her voice tight with a storm of emotions. "What do you know of it?" "I know what it looks like," he said, finally turning to meet her gaze. His eyes were not filled with pity, but with a profound, shared understanding. "I know the shape of that kind of emptiness." He thought of the crushing loneliness of his own childhood, the phantom pain of parents he never knew, a village that had shunned him. His loss was a void, hers was a betrayal. But they were both born of absence. She stared at him, her mask of cold authority completely gone, replaced by a raw, wounded confusion. He saw past the captain, past the assassin. He saw the abandoned girl who had built walls of duty and discipline so high that no one could ever get close enough to leave her again. And he hadn't tried to tear the walls down. He had simply acknowledged their existence. She didn't speak. She just picked up her cloth, her hands trembling slightly, and resumed cleaning her blade. But the silence between them was different now. It was no longer a battlefield. It was a shared space, filled with unspoken truths. The first crack in her emotional armor had appeared. Their fragile, burgeoning understanding was not going unnoticed. The Seraite was a political ecosystem as deadly as any battlefield. And Naruto was a foreign species introduced into its heart. He was being watched. Captain Aizen Sosuke of the 5th Division approached Naruto one afternoon as he was observing a Kido practice session from a distance. Aizen's smile was warm, his demeanor gentle and scholarly. His spiritual pressure was a calm, placid lake. "Uzumaki-san," he began, his voice smooth as honey. "I hope I am not disturbing you. I am Aizen Sosuke. I must confess, the tales of your unique abilities have piqued my academic curiosity." Naruto turned to him. In the normal world, Aizen was the picture of benign charisma. But in Naruto's monochrome sight, he was a horror. Aizen's entire being was a lie. His life thread was encased in a flawless shell, a construct of false warmth and gentle light. But beneath it, Naruto could perceive a deep, chilling dissonance. He saw layers upon layers of deception, like coats of lacquer, concealing a core of such profound, cold ambition and arrogance that it made Akimaru's corruption seem childish in comparison. And most disturbingly, there were threads extending from Aizen that were subtly, expertly woven into the life threads of other Shinigami around them. Threads of manipulation and control so fine they were almost invisible. "Captain Aizen," Naruto replied, his face neutral, his own inner perception carefully shielded. He was looking at a predator far more sophisticated than the bandaged hunter. This one wore the face of a savior. "Your ability to interact with what you call threads," Aizen continued, his smile never wavering. "It is a power that defies the known laws of Kido and spiritual mechanics. I have a theory that it is not a manipulation of reishi, but a direct imposition of will upon the conceptual framework of reality itself. A form of high-level reality warping. Would you be willing to indulge an old scholar and demonstrate it for me, perhaps under more controlled conditions in my research division? It was a tempting offer, wrapped in the guise of intellectual pursuit. But Naruto saw the truth. Aizen didn't want to study his power. He wanted to possess it, to understand its rules so he could break them, or to dissect Naruto to see how it worked. Thank you for the offer, Captain, Naruto said, his voice polite but firm. But Captain Commander Yamamoto was very specific. My supervision is Captain Soi Fon's responsibility alone. I can't go anywhere without her permission. He used the very rules that imprisoned him as a shield. Aizen's smile didn't falter, but Naruto saw a flicker of something in his eyes, a flash of cold, calculating annoyance. He had encountered a variable he couldn't charm, couldn't manipulate, couldn't even properly read. Naruto was a black box, and for a creature of absolute control like Aizen, that was intolerable. A pity, Aizen said smoothly. Perhaps another time. Duty calls. He gave a small bow and walked away. As he watched Aizen leave, Naruto felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air temperature. He had just met the true puppet master. And he knew, with absolute certainty, that Aizen was now his enemy. Aizen, in turn, walked back towards his own barracks, his pleasin' expression slowly melting away into one of cold contemplation. The Ryoka was more than just a powerful anomaly. He was perceptive. He had looked at Aizen and had not seen the gentle captain. He had seen something of the truth beneath. This made him not just a pawn to be potentially used in his plans regarding the Hogyoku, but a direct and unpredictable threat. His plans were delicate, decades in the making. He could not afford a wild card with the power to rewrite reality on a whim. The boy had to be removed. But a direct confrontation was crude, and Aizen was an artist. He would use the system against itself. He made his way to the ornate, sterile halls of Central 46. He didn't go in person, of course. That would be clumsy. But his influence, like his threads, was everywhere. He met with a few key elders. Men whose families he had subtly assisted over the years. He didn't make demands. He simply planted seeds. The Ryoka's power is troubling, is it not? An influence outside of our control. Captain Soi Fon is a fine soldier, but she is young. Is she truly equipped to handle a being of such conceptual weight? I fear for her. He seems to be influencing her. There are whispers that his presence is a magnet for instability. That the attack on the 2nd Division was not a coincidence, but a consequence of his very existence. He watered the seeds of fear and xenophobia that already existed within the ossified heart of Soul Society's government. He painted Naruto not as a potential asset, but as a corrupting plague, an ideological contagion that threatened the sacred order of the Gote 13. He was building the pyre, long before he intended to light the match. The first hint of this new, insidious threat came a few days later. A formal decree was delivered to Soi Fon from Central 46. It stated that due to the unstable and potentially corrupting nature of the Ryoka, he was to be confined to the 2nd Division grounds permanently. All interaction with other divisions was forbidden. His training was to be monitored by a silent, rotating guard of Kido Corps specialists, who stood at the edge of the training yard, observing, recording, and judging. Soi Fon read the decree, her face like stone. She saw it for what it was. A leash, not just for Naruto, but for her. A vote of no confidence. The political gears were turning against them. Naruto read the decree over her shoulder. He wasn't angry. He was focused. He recognized the tone, the subtle, poisonous language of manipulation. This is his work, he said quietly. Soi Fon looked at him, her brow furrowed. Whose? Captain Aizen, Naruto replied. The smiling man. He's trying to isolate us. To paint us into a corner. She wanted to dismiss it. To believe in the integrity of the system. But she remembered the oily sincerity of Aizen's smile. The way he always seemed to be playing a different game from everyone else. And she looked at Naruto, this impossible boy who could see the threads of the world, She felt a chilling premonition that he was right. They were no longer just a captain and her prisoner. They were two people, standing back to back in a room where the walls were slowly closing in. Chapter 4 End. Chapter 5. An unraveling world. The decree from Central 46 was a soft cage, but a cage nonetheless. Naruto was confined, his world shrinking to the stark black and white of the 2nd Division compound. The silent, judging eyes of the Keto Corps observers became a constant presence at the edge of the training yard, their gazes like the lenses of a microscope. The political chill was palpable. Soi Fon grew more withdrawn, the weight of her dual responsibilities, to her duty and to the impossible truth standing beside her, pressing down on her. The easy rhythm they had found was replaced by a tense, brittle silence. Then the world screamed. It began as a subtle tremor in the spiritual fabric of the Seraite, a distant, discordant hum that Naruto felt long before anyone else. It was the sound of a million hateful thoughts coalescing, a rising tide of rage and hunger. He was standing in the training yard, practicing the silent, shadow-merging techniques he was refining, when he froze. His head tilting as if listening to a sound no one else could hear. "What is it?" Soi Fon asked, her hand instantly going to her Zanpakuto. "Something's wrong," he said, his eyes distant. "Something is breaking." Moments later, the warning bells of the Seraite began to toll. Not the single, clear chime for a minor intrusion, but the frantic, clanging death knell reserved for a full-scale invasion. The sound was a frantic, desperate clangor that echoed off the stone buildings, a sound of pure panic. A junior officer of the 2nd Division appeared in a frantic flicker of shunpo, his face pale with terror. "Captain, it's the Rukongai. All of it. A coordinated invasion. Hollows. Thousands of them. The reports. They're saying the numbers are unprecedented." Soi Fon was already moving, her haori swirling around her as she leapt to the top of the nearest watchtower. Naruto was beside her in an instant, a shadow-given form. From their vantage point, they could see it. The sky over, the sprawling districts of the Rukongai was torn open. Garganta portals, dozens of them, ripped through the air like jagged black wounds, spitting forth a tidal wave of monstrous forms. The air was thick with the cacophony of their roars, a sound that shook the very foundations of the Gote 13. It was not a random swarm. This was an army. It moved with a horrifying, coordinated purpose, a black tide of despair and hunger sweeping through the helpless districts, overwhelming the token Shinigami patrols stationed there. "This is impossible," Soi Fon breathed, her eyes wide with disbelief. Coordinate an attack on this scale, to open so many Garganta at once, it would take a power. It wasn't a Shinigami, Naruto said, his voice grim. His monochrome vision was a nightmare. He saw the threads of the hollows, rage, a chaotic, tangled mess of crimson and black. But woven through it all, guiding it, amplifying it, were the same oily, stitched wrong, threads he recognized from the traps and the bandaged hunter. The weaver. It couldn't get to him in the Seraite, so it was kicking the entire anthill, using the hollows as a blunt instrument to flush him out. "They're being herded," he said. "This entire invasion is a distraction. A tool." An emergency summons blared across the Seraite's communication network. All captains were to assemble. Soi Fon turned to go, then stopped, looking at Naruto. The decree was clear. He was not to leave. "I have to go," she said, her voice tight. "And I'm coming with you," Naruto stated, not as a request, but as a fact. "The decree from Central 46 forbids it. If you are seen outside this compound, they will have the pretext they need to order your execution, and brand me a traitor for allowing it. And if you all die out there because the enemy you're fighting isn't what you think it is, what will the decree matter?" He countered, his gaze intense. "Look at them, Soi Fon. This isn't a normal hollow attack. You need me. You know you do." She was trapped between the law and the reality. Between her duty to the system and her duty to the lives that were being extinguished by the second. She looked at his face, at the absolute, unwavering certainty in his eyes. And she made a choice. The second choice she had made that put her on a path away from the rigid doctrine she had lived by her entire life. "Stay in my shadow," she commanded, her voice low and urgent. "Do not be seen. Do not engage unless I give the order. If you compromise my position, I won't," he promised. The captain's assembly was a scene of controlled chaos. Maps were spread, reports were shouted. The scale of the invasion was staggering. Squads were being overwhelmed. The Gote 13, for all its power, was being stretched thin, forced to defend a front that was miles wide. Yamamoto's strategy was swift and brutal. Containment is our only priority. Captains Kuchiki, Komamura, and Hitsugaya will secure the western districts. Captains Kyoraku and Yukataki, you will hold the eastern flank. The Kido Corps will erect a barrier to prevent their advance into the Seraite itself. The rest of you will deploy to the most heavily contested zones and cull their numbers. Do not allow them to consolidate. Go. Soi Fon was assigned to the chaotic northern sector, a dense, urban sprawl where the fighting was fiercest. As the captains dispersed in flashes of light, she moved. And Naruto moved with her, a ghost clinging to her presence. He had folded himself into the fabric of shadow and silence, a non-entity to all but her. She could feel his presence, a spot in the raging inferno of the battlefield, a silent promise at her back. They arrived in the 64th district, and it was a scene from hell. Buildings were torn apart, the ground littered with the dissolving remains of souls. Hollows of every shape and size swarmed through the streets, bestial Jillians, insectoided Jukas, and 1,000 other twisted forms. A small contingent of Shinigami from the 5th Division were fighting a desperate, losing battle, their numbers dwindling. Soi Fon didn't hesitate. She was a blur of motion, her blade a silver flash that decapitated 3 hollows before her feet even touched the ground. 2nd Division, advance. Target the Ajuka's class. Break their command structure. She commanded, her voice cutting through the roar of battle. Her own Onmitsukido members appeared from the shadows, a silent, deadly force multiplier, and plunged into the fray. The battle was a meat grinder. For every hollow they cut down, 2 more seemed to take its place. The sheer numbers were overwhelming. Soi Fon fought like a demon, a whirlwind of steel and Hakuda, but even she could not be everywhere at once. She saw a group of her subordinates, including her oafish Lieutenant Omaeda, get pinned down by a pack of wolf-like hollows, their backs against a crumbling wall. Before she could move to help, a new threat emerged. The ground trembled, and a Jillian of immense Z tore its way through a row of buildings, its Manos Grande mask staring down at them with blank, soulless eyes. It opened its mouth, and the air began to hum with the gathering, crimson energy of a Sero. They were trapped. The Sero would vaporize them all. Scatter. Soi Fon screamed, but it was too late. There was nowhere to go. At that moment, the world went quiet. A dome of absolute, impenetrable darkness bloomed outward from Soi Fon's position, engulfing her pinned down subordinates, and a 50-foot radius around them. To those outside, it was a perfect sphere of black, absorbing all light. But inside, it was not dark. It was a realm of soft, gray twilight. All sound from the outside battle vanished, replaced by a profound and utter silence. The pack of wolf-like hollows, NLY finding themselves inside this strange new territory, froze in confusion. They could no longer see their prey. They could no longer hear the battle. They were cut off. Naruto stepped out of Soi Fon's shadow. His form no longer concealed. The dome was his, a domain of his own making, a bubble of silence and shadow imposed upon reality. What is this? Omaeda stammered, looking around in terror. A blind spot, Naruto said simply. He looked at Soi Fon. Your people are invisible and unheard in here. The hollows outside can't sense you. The ones inside are disoriented. Use it. He didn't need to say it twice. Soi Fon understood instantly. It was the ultimate assassin's tool. An arena where her forces were ghosts. Onmitsukido, she commanded, her voice ringing with renewed authority in the stillness. Eliminate the targets. Swiftly, silently. It was not a battle. It was a slaughter. The disoriented wolf hollows were dispatched in seconds by blades that came from nowhere. Soi Fon hers. Elf used the opportunity to appear directly beneath the chin of the towering Jillian, which was still charging its Sero, completely unaware that its targets had vanished. She drove her blade up through its mask with a single, powerful thrust, killing it instantly. The dome of shadow held for another minute, a perfect sanctuary in the heart of the storm. It allowed the injured to be stabilized, the squads to regroup. Then, as quickly as it had appeared, it dissolved, plunging them back into the chaotic roar of the wider battle. But the tide in their immediate vicinity had turned. Soi Fon looked at Naruto. 1,000 questions in her eyes. He had just demonstrated a large-scale strategic ability that could change the course of a war. But there was no time. The battle raged on. They fought their way deeper into the district. A two-person whirlwind of destruction. Soi Fon was the blade, the swift, deadly strike. Naruto was the shadow, the unseen hand that guided her path, that silently dispatched threats from her blind spots. That subtly altered the battlefield to their advantage. A tripwire would snap just before she stepped on it. A collapsing roof would fall on a pack of hollows instead of her squad. He was a guardian angel dressed in black, his interventions so subtle they were almost unnoticeable, but their cumulative effect was devastating. They were working together now, not as captain in charge, but as partners. A seamless unit of speed and shadow, of precision and perception. They were too effective, and their success drew the attention of the true power on the battlefield. A spiritual pressure descended that dwarfed everything else. It was ancient, powerful, and suffused with a cold, nihilistic despair. The lesser hollows fled from it, scattering like rats. The very air grew heavy, charged with a crushing density. From the largest, most stable garganta, a figure emerged. It was vaguely humanoid, but its body was made of bone-white armor, and it was immense, easily 30 feet tall. It had 6 arms, and in its chest was a gaping black hole where a heart should be. Its mask was a simple, elegant thing, with 2 horn-like protrusions and teardrop markings under its empty eye sockets. A Vasto Lord, the rarest and most powerful class of Manos, a being whose power could rival a captain's. Its cold, empty gaze swept the battlefield and settled on the most potent sources of spiritual energy. It settled on Soi Fon. A captain, its voice was a dry, rasping whisper, like sand blowing over bone. A fine meal to end the day. It raised one of its 6 hands. And a Sero of unimaginable size began to form, a black sun of negative energy that pulsed with the power to erase a whole district. Soi Fon's eyes widened. She knew she could not evade this. She could not block it. Her Bankai was too unwieldy, too destructive to use in such a dense urban environment. She was outmatched. For a split second, her composure broke. A memory, sharp and vivid as a fresh wound, flashed through her mind. A night long ago, a brilliant flash of light. The back of her master, Yoruichi, walking away, leaving her behind without a word, without a reason. The feeling of utter helplessness, of being too weak, too slow, to stop the person she cared for most from leaving. The same feeling of powerlessness washed over her now, a cold wave that froze her muscles, rooting her to the spot. She was going to die here. A failure. Just like that night, the Vasto Lord unleashed the Sero. It was not a beam, but an expanding wave of pure annihilation, a black tide that consumed everything it touched. Soi Fon closed her eyes. She felt a hand on her shoulder. A calm, grounding presence. The world went silent and gray. Naruto was standing in front of her, his back to the oncoming wave of destruction. He wasn't looking at it. He was looking at her, his eyes holding not panic, but an unwavering, absolute calm. "It's okay," he said, his voice the only sound in their silent bubble of reality. "I've got you." He turned to face the Sero. The black wave of energy was feet from his face, a roaring mouth of oblivion. He didn't try to block it. He didn't erect a shield. He lifted his hand. He saw it, the central thread of the Sero. The conceptual linchpin that defined its existence as an attack. A thick, ugly cord of throbbing black and crimson energy. He reached out and took hold of the thread. And with a calm, deliberate motion, he severed it. The effect was reality breaking. The Sero, a force of nature that should have annihilated half the district, simply stopped. The wave of black energy froze in place, inches from his face. Then, like a shattered pane of glass, it cracked. The cracks spread, and the entire Sero crumbled, dissolving into harmless motes of reishi that drifted away like snowflakes. He had not blocked the attack. He had unmade it. The Vasto Lord froze, its empty eye sockets somehow conveying a sense of utter, mind-shattering shock. Its ultimate attack, its very essence given form, had been erased from existence. It was like a god watching its miracle be denied. Naruto didn't give it time to recover. He took Soi Fon's hand. "Your turn," he said. The words, the simple act of his touch, the impossible sight of him negating an attack that should have killed her, it shattered the ice of her paralysis. The memory of Yoruichi's back faded, replaced by the image of his. The shame of her hesitation was washed away by a surge of adrenaline and something else, something she hadn't felt in a long time. Trust. She nodded, her eyes blazing with a renewed, ferocious fire. Naruto pushed off the ground, a shadow carrying her with him, moving with a speed that was not his own, but borrowed from the Shunpo masters he had studied. They appeared directly in front of the stunned Vasto Lord. He let her go, and she became a blur. Naigeki Kesatsu, she roared. 2 strikes. One on the creature's chest, one on its back. The twin marks of her Shikai, the death butterfly, bloomed on its bone-white armor. She landed gracefully, 50 feet away, her blade held ready. The Vasto Lord looked down at the mark on its chest, confused. It was just a small mark. It had felt no pain. It laughed, a dry, rasping sound. Is that it, Shinigami? A love tap. Soi Fon just smiled, a cold, deadly curving of her lips. That was for hesitating. Naruto appeared beside her, his hands in his pockets. Even the fastest person needs someone to watch their back, he said quietly, his words meant only for her. His words hit her harder than the Vasto Lord's Sero would have. It was not a judgment. It was an acceptance, an understanding. He hadn't mocked her moment of weakness. He had covered for it. He had protected her. Her gaze softened for a fraction of a second as she looked at him. The last brick in her emotional wall crumbled into dust. She turned back to the Vasto Lord. And this, she said, is for threatening my division. She snapped her fingers. The death butterfly marks glowed. The Vasto Lord's eyes widened in dawning horror as a wave of poison erupted from within, dissolving its powerful body from the inside out. It gave one last, agonized or before collapsing into a mountain of dust and dissolving reishi. The greatest threat on the battlefield was gone. In the aftermath, as the remaining hollows broke and fled back to their portals, Soi Fon stood amidst the destruction. Her subordinates slowly regrouping around her. They were battered, but they were alive, thanks to him. They looked at Naruto, who stood silently by her side, not as an intruder, but as their savior. She looked at him, truly looked at him, and saw not a monster, not a variable, not a prisoner. She saw the boy who had stepped in front of death for her. The one who had understood her deepest wound without even knowing its name. The one who had watched her back. Her duty was to the Seraite. Her loyalty was to the law. But in that moment, standing in the ruins of a battlefield, a new, fierce, and utterly terrifying loyalty began to bloom in her heart. A loyalty to him. And she knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that one day soon, those loyalties would be put to the test. Chapter 5 End. Chapter 6. The traitors marked the aftermath of the Great Hollow invasion left the Seraite scarred and reeling. The Rukongai districts were a ruin, the body count in the thousands. The Gote 13 had won, but it was a ragged, brutal victory that felt more like a staved-off execution. A pall of suspicion and unease hung over the pristine white towers. The attack was too organized, too massive. It was an aberration, and in a society built on 1,000 years of rigid order, aberrations were the most terrifying things of all. For Naruto and Soi Fon, the return to the 2nd Division compound was a silent one. The shared adrenaline of the battlefield gave way to the heavy, unspoken reality of what had transpired. He had broken his confinement. She had allowed it. They had saved countless lives, yes, but they had also violated a direct order from Central 46. They were heroes of the hour, but they were also criminals waiting for a verdict. The political gears, greased by Aizen's insidious whispers, began to turn with terrifying speed. He did not need to invent lies, he simply had to frame the truth. An emergency session of the Central 46 was convened. Aizen, in his role as a concerned, scholarly captain, presented his findings. He did not appear in person, sending his reports through official channels, maintaining his facade of being above the political fray. His argument was a masterpiece of manipulative logic. The Ryoka, Naruto Uzumaki, was ordered confined, the proclamation read, its cold, formal language echoing in the chamber of the 46. His presence was deemed a source of instability. And what happened the moment he was allowed to run free? The greatest hollow invasion in centuries was drawn to our gates. It is not a coincidence, it is causality. His very existence, a fusion of a living human, a demonic biju, and some unknown, godlike power, is a beacon for chaos. He is a tear in the fabric of our world, and the universe itself is sending its scavengers to close the wound. He presented the evidence. The timing of the attack, the unnatural focus of the hollows, the sheer scale of the incursion. He twisted Naruto's heroism into a damning indictment. He did not repel the invasion, Aizen's report argued. He caused it. His heroics were merely him cleaning up a mess of his own making. And in doing so, he has further revealed the depth of his terrifying, law-breaking power. The ability to negate Kido, to manipulate space, to create zones of unnatural silence, this is not the power of a Shinigami. It is the heresy of a being who would place himself above the laws of reality. And then came the final, killing blow, aimed directly at Soi Fon. Worse still, his corrupting influence has already spread. Captain Soi Fon, a paragon of law and order, a commander whose loyalty was thought to be absolute, willfully disobeyed a direct decree. She did not contain the threat, she unleashed it. Whether through coercion, manipulation, or a catastrophic lapse in judgment, she has proven herself compromised. She has placed the life of a single, dangerous anomaly above the stability of the entire Soul Society. Such a failure of duty cannot be tolerated. The verdict was swift and absolute. The elders of Central 46, old, fearful men steeped in tradition and terrified of the unknown, saw only the threat Aizen had so skillfully illuminated. They saw a monster who had brought ruin to their doorstep, and a captain who had failed to keep him chained. The decree was drafted. It was sealed with the captain commander's authority. Yamamoto himself unable to argue against the crushing weight of the presented logic, and the panic sweeping through the Seraite. The system was turning on itself, just as Aizen had planned. In the quiet solitude of her personal office, Soi Fon was reviewing the damage reports from her division. The numbers were grim, but far less so than they could have been. She owed that to him. Naruto was in his room, a silent presence down the hall, the two of them existing in a state of limbo, waiting for the axe to fall. A hell butterfly, the black herald of official orders, fluttered into her office. It landed on her outstretched finger, its wings dissolving into a scroll of crisp, white paper. She recognized the seal of Central 46. Her heart went cold. She read the words, and her world tilted on its axis. By order of the Central 46, for crimes against the balance of the Soul Society, for being a catalyst of immense destruction, and for possessing a power that threatens the natural order. The Ryoka, Naruto Uzumaki, is hereby sentenced to immediate dissolution. His existence is to be erased. Her breath hitched. Dissolution. Not just execution. A complete unmaking of his soul by the full might of the Kido core. A fate reserved for the most heinous of traitors. She read the next line, and the floor fell out from under her. The sentence is to be carried out without delay by the captain of the 2nd Division, Soi Fon. Your blade will be the instrument of judgment. This is a final test of your loyalty. Comply, and your honor will be restored. Refuse, and you will be branded a traitor and share his fate. A unit of captain-class Shinigami is being dispatched to your location to ensure the sentence is carried out. It was a checkmate, a perfect, cruel, political masterstroke. They weren't just ordering her to kill him. They were ordering her to kill him with her own hands, to prove her loyalty by murdering the very person who had saved her and her division. It was a test she could not pass. To obey would be to betray everything she had come to believe, to murder an innocent boy who was the victim, not the cause. To refuse would be to declare war on the entire system she had sworn her life to uphold. Her hands trembled, the scroll crinkling in her grip. Her mind raced. She thought of his quiet understanding, his unnerving calm. She thought of him standing in front of the Vasto Lord Sero, his back to her, a silent guardian. She thought of his simple words, even the fastest person needs someone to watch their back. He had watched her back. Now, the entire world was demanding she put a knife in his. She stood up, her movements stiff, robotic. She walked down the silent hallway to his room. The door was open. He was sitting by the window, looking out at the twilight. As if he were waiting for her. He turned as she entered, his eyes immediately finding the scroll in her hand. He didn't need to read it. He could see the thread of despair and horror emanating from her, the sickly purple thread of the decree itself. They want you to kill me, don't they? He asked, his voice quiet. She couldn't speak. She just nodded, her throat tight. He stood up and walked towards her. He didn't look scared. He looked disappointed. Not in her, but in the world that had passed such a blind judgment. He looked at the scroll, then at her face, at the torment in her eyes. "What are you going to do?" he asked. It wasn't a challenge. It was a genuine question from one soul to another. This was the moment, the precipice. Her entire life, her identity, had been built on a foundation of loyalty to the Gote 13. It was her bedrock, her religion. Yoruichi had abandoned that loyalty, and Soi Fon had spent a century despising her for it, defining herself by its opposite. And now, she was being asked to make the same choice. Duty versus heart, law versus justice. She looked at him, at this impossible boy who had crashed into her world and shattered her certainty. He was a monster, an anomaly, a walking paradox. But he was also brave, and perceptive, and in his own strange way, deeply honorable. He had trusted her. He had protected her. Her choice was no choice at all. It was an inevitability, born in the crucible of the battlefield. She met his gaze, and for the first time, he saw not a captain, but just Soi Fon. And in her eyes, there was no conflict. There was only resolve. "They are not my master," she said, her voice a low, fierce whisper. And with a single, sharp motion, she crushed the execution order in her fist. A profound relief washed over Naruto. He hadn't known what she would choose, not for certain. But he had hoped. He gave her a small, grateful smile. The moment of quiet solidarity was shattered. 3 a.m. Men's spiritual pressures descended on the compound, flanking it, cutting off all escape. Byakuya Kuchiki, Jin Ichimaru, Kanami Tosen, 3 captains, dispatched to witness the execution. "It appears your colleagues have arrived," Naruto said, his posture shifting from relaxed to ready. Soi Fon's did as well. Her hand closed around the hilt of her Zanpakuto, Suzumaki. "They have." The doors to her office burst open. Captain Kuchiki stood there, his face a mask of cold, aristocratic disapproval. His hand rested on the hilt of Senbon Sakura. "Captain Soi Fon," he said, his voice like chipping ice. "The time has come. Carry out the sentence." Soi Fon turned to face him. She stood straight and tall, her small frame radiating an authority that rivaled his own. "The Ryoka is under the protection of the 2nd Division. He is not a threat." Byakuya's eyes narrowed. "That is not for you to decide. Your orders are clear. Are you defying a direct command from Central 46? "Central 46 has been misled," she countered, her voice ringing with a conviction that stunned him. "They have sentenced an innocent being based on lies and fear. I will not be the instrument of their injustice." It was a declaration of treason. The words hung in the air, irrevocable and damning. Byakuya's face hardened. This was no longer a simple matter of overseeing a sentence. This was quelling a rebellion. "Then you have made your choice," Byakuya said, his voice dropping dangerously. "You are a traitor to the Gote 13. By the laws you once upheld, you too are sentenced to death." Before he could even finish the word, Soi Fon moved. But she didn't attack him. She grabbed Naruto's arm. "This way." She pulled him towards the back of her office, towards a large, ornate scroll hanging on the wall. It depicted a soaring hawk. She bit her thumb, drew a line of blood across the scroll's center, and slammed her palm against it. Kai. The wall dissolved, revealing not the outside world, but a dark, swirling tunnel, a secret Onmitsukido escape route. Known only to its commander. "They will be on us in seconds," she yelled, pulling him towards the portal. From the hallway, a lazy voice drawled, Now, Soi-chan," leaving without saying goodbye. Jin Ichimaru stood there, his ever-present, foxy smile plastered on his face, his eyes narrowed to slits. His Zanpakuto was already partially drawn. "Shoot to kill, Shinso," he whispered. The blade extended with impossible speed, aiming to pierce both Naruto and Soi Fon before they could reach the portal. Naruto saw the thread of the attack. He didn't have time to sever it. Instead, he shoved Soi Fon forward, into the portal, while he spun around, his hand outstretched. He didn't try to block the blade. He caught it. His palm closed around the tip of Shinso. The metal should have gone straight through his hand, but instead it stopped dead, held fast. The force of the impact sent spiderweb cracks through the floor beneath him. Jin's smile widened, but His unseen eyes held a flicker of genuine shock. No one had ever caught Shinso before. Naruto's eyes glowed with a faint, dark light. He looked at Jin, and for a second, the smiling captain felt a chill of true, primal fear. He felt as if he were being looked at by something that could unmake him with a thought. "You're one of them, aren't you?" Naruto said, his voice a low growl. "A puppet. I can see his strings on you." He recognized the fine, almost invisible threads of manipulation connected to Jin, the same kind he had seen on Aizen. He tightened his grip, and the indestructible blade of Shinso began to groan, to bend under the pressure of his hand. Before he could snap it, a storm of pink petals filled the hallway. Senbon Sakura. Naruto was forced to release the blade and leap back, the swarm of microscopic blades shredding the spot where he had stood. The escape portal was beginning to close. He gave one last look at Byakuya and Jin, who were now advancing, their expressions grim and determined. He turned and dove through the shimmering tunnel an instant before it sealed shut, leaving the two captains in a ruined, empty office. Soi Fon and Naruto tumbled out of the other end of the portal, landing hard in a dusty, forgotten corner of the Rukongai, miles away from the Seraite. The sounds of pursuit were gone. They were alone. Soi Fon scrambled to her feet, her chest heaving, adrenaline coursing through her. She had done it. She had thrown away her life, her career, her honor, everything she had ever been, for him. She was a traitor, an exile, the same thing she had always despised. Naruto got to his feet, dusting himself off. He looked at her, at the raw terror and defiant resolve warring in her eyes. He walked over to her, his expression serious. "Thank you," he said, his voice filled with a quiet, profound gratitude. She just stared at him, her world collapsing and reforming around this single, central point. "What have I done?" she whispered, the full weight of her actions finally crashing down on her. "You chose," he said simply. "You chose justice over orders. You chose me." From the shadows of the Seraite, Aizen Sosuke watched the spiritual PR. Eshers of Naruto and Soi Fon vanish from his senses as they used the escape route. His plan had worked perfectly. Better than perfectly. He had not only framed Naruto, but he had also excised one of the most dangerously perceptive and loyal captains from the board, branding her a traitor in the process. He had isolated the variable and its keeper. He looked up at the pale moon, a small, genuine smile gracing his lips. He felt the subtle thrum of a presence that was not of the Soul Society, a silent observer to whom he was, in a way, reporting. "The aberration has been purged from the system," he murmured to the empty air. "It is now adrift, vulnerable. Your move, Weaver." Chapter 6 End. Chapter 7. The land of Shinobi. The Rukongai was a different world when you were prey. The sprawling, chaotic districts were no longer just a backdrop to a chase, they were a labyrinth with no exit. Every corner they turned, every shadow they melted into, felt temporary. Soi Fon, master of stealth and evasion, now felt the crushing weight of being the one who was hunted. Her own techniques, her own doctrines, were being used against her. She could feel the tightening net of the Onmitsukido, Onmitsukido, their familiar sensory patterns sweeping through the districts, methodical and relentless. They were holed up in the husk of a collapsed storehouse in one of the outermost, most derelict districts. A place where even the poorest souls rarely ventured. Dust motes danced in the slivers of moonlight piercing the ruined roof. Soi Fon was tense, a coiled spring, her senses stretched to their breaking point. Listening for the faintest whisper of a pursuer's shunpo. "They will find us," she said, her voice a low, grim whisper. "It is only a matter of time. The Seraite is a cage. There is no way out." Naruto was sitting on a pile of rubble, surprisingly calm. The frantic energy of their escape had settled, replaced by a deep, resonant focus. He was looking at his hand, not at the physical flesh, but at the golden life thread that composed it in his monochrome sight. He was beginning to understand. The power wasn't just about severing. It was about interacting. It was a language, and he was finally learning the grammar. "Maybe we don't need a way out," he said, his gaze distant. "Maybe we need a way through." Soi Fon looked at him, her brow furrowed. "What are you talking about?" "When I came here, I tore a hole between worlds," he explained, looking up at her. "It was an accident. A violent, uncontrolled rip. But what if it doesn't have to be? Everything is connected by threads. My world, your world, they're part of the same tapestry. They have to be connected somewhere. He closed his eyes, sinking deep into his own perception. He ignored the frantic energy of the Soul Society, the sweeping patrols, the fear and anger directed at them. He searched for something else. A resonance. A faint, familiar hum beneath the cacophony. It was the energy of his home. Of chakra. Of the vibrant, living world he had been torn from. He found it. It was a whisper, a barely audible thread of brilliant, sun-gold energy buried deep in the conceptual static. It was his connection, his anchor to his own timeline. It was faint and impossibly far away, but it was there. I found it, he breathed, his eyes snapping open. They held a new, fierce light. A thread. It leads home. Home. Soi Fon's heart clenched. Konoha. The place he had spoken of. A world she couldn't even imagine. I think I can open it again, he said, a tremor of uncertainty and excitement in his voice. Not a violent tear, but a door. I can pull the thread, make a path. He stood up, a newfound purpose radiating from him. But we have to go now. Both of us. She stared at him. Go with him. To another world. A world of living humans, of shinobi, and chakra. She was a soul, a shinigami. Her place was here. But what was her place now? A traitor's cell, an executioner's block. I can't. She started. The ingrained identity of a century warring with the reality of the last few days. I am a soul of this place. I wouldn't be able to exist in a living world. You can if you're with me, he said with an unshakable confidence that bordered on arrogance, yet felt like a simple statement of fact. My power, it bends the rules. The pressure of my own existence is a fusion of both worlds. As long as you're with me, you'll be anchored, you'll be real. He held out his hand. I'm not leaving you here, Soi Fon. We're in this together. That was the choice, remember. She looked at his outstretched hand. His promise was insane, based on a power neither of them truly understood. It was a leap into an abyss. But staying here was a guaranteed death. He was offering an impossible chance, a path to somewhere new. She thought of her life, a straight, rigid line of duty and discipline, and how this boy had shattered it into 1,000 pieces. Maybe it was time to build something new from the wreckage. She took his hand. Her smaller, calloused fingers wrapped around his. His grip was warm and firm, a grounding anchor in the chaos of her world. Okay, she whispered. Together. Naruto gave her a determined nod. He closed his eyes again, his other hand reaching out into the empty air. He focused on the golden thread of his home. He gathered the cold, silent power of the Kage no Kami within him, not as a weapon, but as a tool, a key. He pulled. The air in front of them did not rip or tear. It shimmered. It warped, like heat haze over a desert road. The colors of the Dilopita Ted warehouse began to bleed and run together. A single, vertical line of brilliant white light appeared in the air, humming with a low, resonant frequency. Naruto pulled harder, his brow furrowed in concentration, sweat beading on his forehead. The line of light widened, unfolding like a door being opened. Through the shimmering aperture, they did not see another part of the Rukongai. They saw a forest canopy under a blue sky. They could smell the scent of pine and damp earth, feel the warmth of a living sun. Hold on tight, Naruto grunted, the effort straining him. Just as they were about to step through, a wave of immense spiritual pressure crashed down on their location. They found us, Soi Fon hissed, her head snapping towards the ruined entrance of the warehouse. Silhouetted agains. The moon stood Captain Kenpachi Zaraki, a wild, bloodthirsty grin on his face, his tiny vice captain, Yakiru, perched on his shoulder. And beside him, Captain Kuretsuchi, his face a manic mask of scientific lust. Well, what have we here? Kenpachi's voice was a low, excited growl. The traitor and her pet monster, trying to sneak away. I was hoping I'd get to fight you before you were executed. Fascinating. Mayuri cackled, his eyes fixated on the shimmering portal. A self-sustaining portal between realms. The data. I must have it. I must have him. Naruto didn't waste a second. Go. He yelled at Soi Fon, shoving her towards the portal. She stumbled through, the sensation a jarring, dizzying lurch. She turned back just in time to see Naruto face the two captains. Kenpachi was already charging, his raw, unrestrained power a tidal wave of killing intent. Naruto didn't fight him. He simply raised his hand, and the entire ruined warehouse began to collapse. He wasn't targeting the captains. He was severing the structural integrity of the building itself. Beams snapped, walls crumbled. It was a perfect, instantaneous demolition. He used the chaos as cover, leaping back through the portal just as tons of rubble crashed down where he had been standing. The portal snapped shut behind him with a sound like a thunderclap, leaving two furious captains in a cloud of dust and debris. The transition was violent. It felt like being turned inside out and squeezed through a pinhole. Soi Fon landed hard on soft grass, the air driven from her lungs. The world spun, a nauseating kaleidoscope of green and blue. The air was thick, heavy, and overwhelmingly alive. It was an assault on her senses, which were accustomed to the sterile reishi of the Soul Society. She felt a wave of dizziness, her spiritual form struggling to exist in this dense, physical world. Then Naruto landed beside her, and his presence was like a lighthouse in the storm. The crushing pressure of the living world receded, balanced by the strange, dual nature of his own energy. She could breathe again. She was, as he had promised, anchored. She pushed herself up, looking around. They were in a clearing in a vast forest, the likes of which she had never seen. The trees were colossal, their trunks thick as towers, the canopy so high it seemed to scratch the sky. The air hummed with the energy of countless living things. It was a world pulsing with a raw, untamed vitality. Naruto was on his knees, breathing heavily, sweat pouring down his face. Opening the door had taken a tremendous toll. "Are you all right?" she asked, her voice laced with a concern that was becoming distressingly familiar. "Just tired," he gasped. "Need a minute." Before he could recover, a new sound reached them. The saintel of projectiles cutting through the air. "Get down!" Soi Fon yelled, tackling Naruto to the ground. A volley of kunai and shuriken thudded into the tree trunk behind them, quivering with deadly intent. They were surrounded. Figures dropped from the trees, clad in drab, functional armor, their faces covered by masks. But these were not the elegant, porcelain masks of the Onmitsukido. These were grim, animalistic masks. Root Anbu, and with them were shinobi wearing the scratched forehead protectors of the Sound Village. They had emerged from the frying pan and into the fire. The world Naruto had left behind had not stood still. In the months he had been gone, time flowing differently in the Soul Society, the situation had deteriorated catastrophically. The Weaver, the cosmic entity hunting him, had been unable to directly strike him within the guarded confines of the Seraite. So, it had changed its tactics. It began to pull at the threads of his home, to unravel the world he was tied to, seeking to weaken his anchor. To draw him out. Its influence was a subtle poison. It amplified existing tensions, stoked old hatreds. Orochimaru, already a megalomaniac, found his ambition burning with a new, unholy fire. His plans for the invasion of Konoha, once months or even years away, were accelerated at a frantic pace. He forged an alliance with the Sand Village, preying on the Kazecage's greed and Gaara's instability, which was now magnified to a terrifying degree by the Weaver's touch. The world was sliding into war, a war orchestrated from beyond the veil. And Naruto and Soi Fon had just landed in the middle of a forward skirmish line. A leaf shinobi, one of the Sound Ninja hissed, his eyes locking onto Naruto's tattered orange jumpsuit. And some woman in black. "Kill them. Lord Orochimaru wants no leaf scouts near the village." Soi Fon was on her feet, her wakizashi a glimmer of silver in the dappled sunlight. This was a new kind of enemy. She could feel their energy, chakra, not reishi. It was cruder, more elemental, but no less deadly. They moved with a grounded, powerful athleticism, so different from the floating grace of Shinigami. A Sound Ninja blurred forward, his hands a flurry of signs. "Wind style. Great breakthrough," he roared, unleashing a gale force blast of wind that tore through the clearing. Soi Fon's eyes widened. They could command the elements themselves. She moved to dodge, but the attack was too wide. Naruto, still weary, pushed himself to his feet. He stepped in front of her and simply held up his hand. He didn't sever the thread of the jutsu. He did something simpler. He severed the connection between the wind and the ninja who cast it. The gale, inches from his face, lost all its forward momentum. It dissolved into a gentle, harmless breeze that rustled his hair. The sound ninja stared, his jaw slack. His ultimate technique had been neutralized with a casual gesture. Soi Fon did not waste the opening. She used Shunpo. To the shinobi, it was as if she had teleported. She appeared behind the stunned ninja, and the twin marks of her death butterfly bloomed on his neck. Before his comrades could even react, she was gone, a black flicker, leaving the ninja to collapse, dead before he hit the ground. She was an alien concept to them. A warrior who moved without speed, whose killing blow left no wound. What was that? What is she? One of the Root Anbu whispered. His professional calm shattered. The fight was a brutal, confusing dance of two different worlds of combat. The shinobi used elemental ninjutsu, deceptive genjutsu, and explosive paper tags. Soi Fon met them with the impossible speed of Shunpo and the lethal certainty of her shikai. She was appalled by their style of warfare, the explosive, chaotic destruction, the reliance on tricks and tools. It was so uncivilized, so messy. Naruto, for his part, acted as a nexus, a control point. He stood in the center of the chaos, his monochrome vision picking apart the shinobi's techniques. An earth wall would crumble into dust before it could block an attack. A fireball jutsu would wink out of existence. A genjutsu attempting to ensnare Soi Fon's mind would find its threads severed, its caster collapsing with a scream of psychic feedback. He was a walking, talking dead magic zone. They decimated the patrol in less than a minute. The last remaining Root Anbu, seeing the tide had turned so impossibly against them, made a hand seal. His body began to glow. He's going to blow himself up. Naruto yelled, recognizing the suicide technique. He grabbed Soi Fon and created a localized dome of shadow, just as the shinobi detonated in a brilliant, fiery explosion that scorched the clearing black. They emerged from the shadow untouched, standing in the center of a smoldering crater. Soi Fon was breathing hard, her eyes wide with a mixture of shock and disgust. They fight with no honor, she spat. To use their own body as a bomb, it's monstrous. Welcome to the elemental nations, Naruto said grimly. He looked towards the direction of his village. The air was hazy with the distant smoke of fires. He could hear the faint, far-off sounds of explosions. The invasion had already begun. They're attacking Konoha, he said, his voice heavy. He felt a pang of guilt. This was happening because of him. The Weaver was punishing his world for his existence. He looked at Soi Fon. Her pristine black uniform was smudged with dirt, her expression a mixture of fatigue and disorientation. She was an exile, a traitor, in a world she didn't understand, fighting enemies she had never imagined. All because of him. We need to go, he said, his voice softening. My friends are there. They need help. Their reunion with the forces of Konoha was one of sheer, unadulterated shock. They entered the village from the north, finding a desperate battle raging near the academy. Familiar faces, Shikamaru, Choji, Ino, were fighting back to back against a horde of sound and sand shinobi. Naruto, Shikamaru gasped, his eyes wide as he saw the blonde boy appear from the smoke, no longer the loud-mouthed idiot he knew, but a figure of grim, terrifying calm. And Bessid. Him was a woman in black who moved like a phantom, her presence cold and deadly. Shikamaru, what's the situation? Naruto's voice was no longer a shout, but a commander's clipped inquiry. It's a total mess. They came out of nowhere. Gaara, he's lost it. He's a monster, tearing through the arena. Lord Hokage is fighting their leader. We're being overrun. Understood, Naruto said. He turned to Soi Fon. You take the fodder. Disrupt their command. I'll handle the big problems. It was not a request. It was a strategic delegation. And she, the former commander of the Onmitsukido, simply nodded and vanished. Soi Fon became a ghost in the battle for Konoha. The enemy shinobi suddenly found their leaders dropping dead from unseen attacks. Squads would find themselves disoriented, their communication lines severed. She moved through the chaos like a surgeon, excising the key threats with a cold, terrifying efficiency that turned the tide of the skirmish lines. The Leaf Shinobi could only stare in awe and fear as this unknown woman in black dismantled the enemy invasion force from the inside out. Naruto, meanwhile, moved towards the arena. He felt it, a maelstrom of sand and bloodlust. The screeching rage of a fellow Jinchuriki, amplified and twisted by the Weaver's corrupting influence. He had to face Gaara. And as he ran, he saw the threads of the world around him. The air itself crackled with malice. Jutsus were fizzling out randomly. Shinobi were turning on their own comrades in fits of paranoid rage. The Weaver's influence was no longer subtle. It was a cancer, actively metastasizing through his home. This was his fault, and he would fix it. Chapter 7 End.